with Trump's grip on the Department of Justice on the line. I want to bring in my colleague, MS Now Congressional reporter Mychael Schnell, Punchbowl News senior congressional reporter Andrew Desiderio, and USA Today Washington bureau chief Susan Page. Mychael, I'm going to go first to you in the halls of the Capitol. What did you make of what we heard from Cassidy? We played a little bit of it, but it was a pretty lengthy speech on the floor explaining why he's making this choice.
I think certainly, Ali, he struggled with this decision. I think that was evident in the emotions that he showed at the end. He also noted, I'm going to be criticized for this, but what else is new? What I found striking and interesting was that he basically said that Todd Blanche isn't the perfect nominee, but he's the right person at this moment, and he's somebody who he could support. He said that he did not support the idea that Todd Blanche had approved that anti-weaponization fund or let those IRS audit immunities go through. But then he said Todd Blanche has since called those issues mistakes. And then he got into this issue about independence at the DOJ and whether or not Blanche would be able to serve in that capacity or if he would still do the president's bidding, given the fact that he was formerly the president's personal attorney. He kind of turned that potential negative into a positive, saying that because Todd Blanche knows the president so well, he will be able to give him candid advice and say when he disagrees with him when needed. Take a listen to some of what Bill Cassidy had to say in making these arguments and trying to thread this needle.
Mr. Blanche showed poor judgment in approving the anti-weaponization slush fund and exempting the president from IRS audits. Mr. Blanche said these were mistakes and he has made efforts to kill the slush fund, and he is not the president. He also points out that he can advise the president, but the president is not obligated to take his advice. That is the same thing that former Attorney General Barr said in a separate conversation. And Mr. President, I can absolutely believe that President Trump at times would not take advice.
Now, Ali, in addition to laying out that rationale of why he ultimately came to this yes vote, he also discussed the process, because all week Bill Cassidy has only been telling reporters no comment. He has not said anything about which way he was leaning. Behind the scenes, we're now learning that he was making a number of phone calls. He said he spoke with Tom Tillis and John Cornyn, the two Republicans who were on the fence and then voted yes after they struck that deal with Todd Blanche about the fund and about the IRS immunity. He also said he spoke to Senator Lisa Murkowski, who this morning said she would vote against Todd Blanche. And he spoke to the former Attorney General, Bill Barr. You heard him allude to that just earlier, in addition to two U.S. attorneys from Louisiana. So clearly, a lot of pushing and pulling when it came to this decision. But ultimately, Bill Cassidy voting to confirm Todd Blanche to the permanent job. And notably, again, the second time this year that he is the deciding vote on one of President Trump's more controversial cabinet nominees.
Yeah, definitely the second time he's been in this position. So he knows the kind of pushback he gets in either decision that he makes, right? And I think that we don't necessarily spend enough time talking about the threats and the security issues that come when you either buck or fall in line with the president. That's certainly a new feature over the last decade, unfortunately, that our politics has come to include, not what we typically expect of American democracy, and yet there it is. But Andrew, I'm so struck by the ways that he talks about the president, effectively saying at one point, well, Trump's going to Trump, so we may as well put an ally in there. And he talks about the role of advise and consent that the Senate has, but it's clear he's not taking the Senate's advise, and it's also clear that he's not necessarily taking the advice of the people he puts in at his cabinet. So what did you make of the rationale that Senator Cassidy gave there, Andrew, as someone who has followed him for years and has seen him just in the last 2 years struggle with these kinds of decisions?
Yeah, look, Senator Cassidy famously, voted to support RFK Jr. as HHS Secretary and got and secured what he thought were promises on a number of issues, especially related to vaccines, and those promises did not pan out. So it would be natural for Senator Cassidy to then be skeptical of future nominees for positions of this import making similar sort of commitments to him. But I do want to emphasize the role that Bill Barr, the former Attorney General, played in all of this. Bill Barr spoke not only with Senators Tillis and Cornyn, but extensively with Bill Cassidy, as he revealed there on the Senate floor. I think that's an important element of this, showing that there were a lot of outside forces who were pushing for Todd Blanche to be confirmed. And, you did hear in Senator Cassidy's speech this argument we hear from Republicans a lot, which is, well, if it's not this guy, it could be someone worse, right? That is an argument that plays well with with a lot of Senate Republicans these days. And, I've heard folks compare it to, what if he tried to install Matt Gaetz in there, for example, the former Republican congressman. He was Trump's initial pick for Attorney General, obviously, right? Someone that Republicans effectively killed right away. So it's this whole idea of, well, it could be worse, so let's just go with this guy.
Yeah, the idea of grading on a curve, whether it's around Gaetz or Bill Pulte in that Director of National Intelligence role, I think you're right. It has become a pattern that we've seen. But Susan, we've also seen this pattern of moments where Republicans, even those who don't have personal political stakes because their careers are ending, largely because of Trump, indirectly or directly, in Cassidy's case, quite directly, but it would be the moment for them to break with the president. And I wonder what you make of the fact that we are now once again, yes, seeing Collins and Murkowski assert their independence against the party line, but for them it's not necessarily new. Instead, for someone like Tillis, Cornyn, Cassidy, I think there was an expectation that maybe this would be a moment where they might do the same, and they haven't. So what does it say to you?
Yeah, this is such a familiar pattern. We hold our breaths. We have Murkowski and Collins out there taking on the president. But at the end of the day, the president's nominee just barely gets over the finish line. And one reason there was some thought maybe this time was going to be different was because there are these 3 votes from Republican senators who are being pushed out of their jobs because of Donald Trump. Would they show a little bit more of an independent streak? And what we're finding is that's not the case. Even though the president's approval ratings are dismal and he's heading toward this midterm that looks very problematic for Republicans, he continues to have the ability to hold on the Republican Party to force these senators to do his will, even when they're heading for the exits. So I think this is a vote that is very good news for President Trump, likely to embolden him in his dealings with the Justice Department, not to make the new Attorney General more powerful in pushing back.
I think that's probably where this ends up going, Susan. You're right. But Trump was also hedging. He knew that this was a nomination that was potentially in peril. I mean, it was at least being postponed because of concerns by Republican senators. He was saying he would keep him in an acting capacity regardless. It didn't necessarily matter from a tangible who's running the DOJ perspective. But I was struck, Andrew, when Jake Sherman, your colleague at Punchbowl, asked the president about the Blanche battle. I want to play a piece of that interview.
A lot of these people who are against him, who have given you trouble on him, are people you endorsed against. Do you regret any going against these people? It makes your agenda harder to get through.
Look, I don't regret it. You do what you have to do.
Yeah. Do you want Thune to serve another term as leader?
Just so you understand, they voted to impeach me.
So look, there's 2 parts of that, right? There's the one around Blanche, which is the consequences of the president's own actions could have touched him in terms of the way that these Republicans voted. Ultimately, that's not what happened. And then the second part of that is Thune related. So stay focused on the first part. Is there any reason for these Republicans to assert their independence when they know no matter what they do, the president's loyalty only goes one way?
Well, I think that's the point, one of the many points that Senator Cornyn has underscored in particular.
Yeah.
Just last week, he held up 2 nominees in the Foreign Relations Committee, Carrie Lake and Doug Mastriano, of course, infamously 2 prominent election deniers from 2020, who've been nominated for ambassador positions. Carrie Lake for Jamaica and Doug Mastriano for Slovakia, of course. And Senator Cornyn was the deciding vote in the committee. And what he decided to do was say, okay, I'll vote for these nominees, but you, the administration, have to promise me that you're going to release funds as part of this program called PEPFAR, which is one of the most successful global health programs in modern history in terms of AIDS, HIV and AIDS prevention in Africa. This was a George W. Bush administration initiative, and it's very bipartisan, but the administration hasn't doled out all of the money that Congress appropriated for it, which of course has been a pattern under Trump's second presidency. But Senator Cornyn settled for what was a quote-unquote promise or a commitment and then voted to advance those nominees to the Senate floor. Those senators are very keenly aware that a promise and a commitment from especially someone like Russ Vought, who runs the Office of Management and Budget, who controls these decisions, doesn't really mean much these days. So Senator Cornyn seemed to acknowledge that when I asked him about it right after he he decided to let those nominations go forward. And by the way, I don't think Majority Leader Thune is eager to put those on the floor as standalones.
I think that's right, but that also kind of gets me to the next question, Mychael, which is, when do we think we're going to see the Blanche nomination actually hit the main Senate floor? But then also, the sort of addendum to what made this an interesting thing is you're not dealing with 100 senators right now. You're dealing with 99 of them because Senator Mitch McConnell's absence changed the calculus around the Blanche vote. What are your sources saying about that piece of it? And then, of course, again, the timing.
Yeah, Ali, this was always going to be a two-step exercise. First off, does Todd Blanche even have enough support to become the permanent attorney general? Now, with Bill Cassidy's vote, he does. But the second part of this process is, when can that vote actually happen? That's because the Senate today is the last day that they're scheduled to be here in Washington before breaking for the August recess, where senators can go back to their home states, campaign in the lead up to November. And they have a number of issues still on their to-do list, including a stopgap funding bill, bill to enact sanctions on Russia, and a number of other matters. So right now, leadership is working through these different items, trying to work out disagreements behind the scenes to come to some sort of agreement on speeding up the process here. And so that is happening behind the scenes right now. We just heard from Thune within the past few minutes that he thinks they're trending in the right direction, but we're going to have to see. In terms of the second question of the absences, McConnell was so central to why Cassidy held all the cards when it came to Todd Blanche. He is still recovering at home